Good morning, and welcome to today's Race Count webinar. My name is Femme, and I'm the Race Count Manager here at Advanced Project California. Today I'm joined by my colleague. Can you guys hear me? Okay, good. Today I'm joined by my colleague, Ron Sims and Ryan Natividad, who will be helping us take your questions this morning. Quick reminder, participants are encouraged to use the chat section to ask questions during the session this morning. Our primary goals for this webinar are for users to understand the rationale and approach behind race counts, become familiar with the tool and its major findings, be able to navigate the online platform, and identify ways to use race counts in their advocacy campaigns. Here's a quick overview of what we'll be covering this morning. We'll start by briefly going over the background and rationale for the project. Then I'll explain the approach and methodology behind the online tool. Next, we'll discuss the project's overall findings. Then take a moment to do a deep dive into one of the counties using Los Angeles as our case study. Afterwards, we'll walk through a live demonstration of the site. And near the end, we'll briefly discuss how organizations can use race counts in their advocacy campaigns. Finally, we'll go over next steps for the project. At this point, I'd like to ask that at the end of the webinar, all participants please consider completing the survey that we'll be sending via email. Now, before we get into the project background and rationale, I want to pose a guiding question for this tutorial. And that question is, how do we create systems that ensure equitable access to resources and opportunities for all Californians? So back in 2015, when we first thought of developing a tool like this, there simply weren't many tools out there for community advocates that provided a clear picture of what was going on in the state around racial equity. As an organization that's committed to lifting up the voices of communities of color in the policymaking and budgeting process, we felt it was necessary to partner with statewide community advocacy organizations like California Calls in Pico, California, as well as research organizations like USC Peer. We partnered with these organizations because we wanted to make sure that the framework we developed was both rigorous and community informed. As a result, we created a tool that blends advocacy, organizing, and research to support organizers in their local campaigns and statewide policy fights. Now, before I explain the underlying methodology for race counts, I would like participants to think about an instance where you've used data on race to inform your organization's work or goals. What are some of the challenges you faced accessing and framing this data? Did you find this data simple or difficult to access? How about presenting it or explaining it to different audiences? Did you find that people were more or less receptive to this data? In the process of developing a list of issues and indicators across a wide range of topics, we scoured the academic literature and worked with over 80 community-based organizations to find out what issues folks on the ground cared about most. We found that both researchers and community residents were most concerned about issues like economic opportunity, housing, the healthy built environment, healthcare access, democracy, education, and crime and justice. We further divided these issue areas into 6 to 8 sub-issues, such as housing quality and homeownership, park access, food access, employment and household income, poverty, incarceration, life expectancy, health insurance, high school graduation, access to early childhood education, census participation, and registered voters. So this is a list of all 44 of our data indicators. We then compiled the data on these issues from all publicly available data sources. We analyzed the data, and we plotted the results on a scatter graph using what we call a three-dimensional analytical framework. This three-dimensional analytical framework is called performance, disparity, and impact. And this is what we get. Each of these colored bubbles represents one of California's 58 counties. Using the vertical axis, we measure performance, which refers to how well a particular county is doing on any given issue or indicator. Let's take high school graduation, for examples. The counties above the line all have performance levels that are higher than average. The higher the bubble is, the higher its performance. Similarly, the bubbles below the axis represent those counties performing below average. If we take another indicator like school suspensions, for example, the counties with higher than average or essentially worse suspension rates will fall below the axis and be considered poorly performing, while counties with low suspension rates, which is what we should be striving for, end up above the axis. That's performance. When we talk about disparity, which we're measuring along the horizontal axis, we are measuring how wide the gaps are in performance between racial groups. So what does that look like? That looks like the counties to the right of the axis having wider disparities between races, while counties to the left of the axis have smaller gaps. In other words, smaller disparities between racial groups. And again, this is what we're striving for. So say we're looking at high school graduation again. The bubbles to the right of the axis represent the counties that have bigger gaps in high school graduation rates than between, say, Asian and African American students, while the bubbles to the left of the axis represent those counties whose difference in graduation rates between races is low. So if we're looking at both performance and racial disparity at the same time, we'll find that the counties that appear in orange, for example, represent those that are high performing overall. Notice they're located above the axis, but they also have wider racial disparities between groups. By the same token, the counties that appear in yellow are the counties that are low performing. Notice they're situated below the axis, but they have smaller, meaning less racial disparity or difference between groups. Now, when we focus our attention to the last dimension of this 3D framework, impact, we're looking to see how big of a population is being affected by a given issue. For instance, this small county here, Inyo County, has a population of 18,000 people. Compare that to Los Angeles County, which has a population of 10 million residents. The size of the bubble illustrates the size of the population living in a given county. If we move on to the next slide, we can see where a number of the counties fall on this graph. Let me pause for a moment and give folks an opportunity to take this in. What do the labels gains at risk, prosperity for the few, struggling to prosper, and stuck in equal mean? The counties in the red are the most critical. These are the counties that are not only worse than average on overall performance compared to the rest of the state, but you have some racial groups living within these counties that are doing even worse than that. So what would policy solutions look like for counties that fall in this quadrant? Well, in these counties, policymakers would do best if they not only work to improve prosperity and overall outcomes in these counties, but also work to ensure that in their policy proposals, that the most marginalized and vulnerable communities aren't left behind. The counties in the yellow are in a slightly different predicament. Now, similar to the red quadrant, these counties also fall below the axis. So that means they perform worse than average compared to the rest of the state. The bright side, however, is that these counties don't experience as much racial disparity. That means advocates and policymakers in these counties should focus their efforts on improving outcomes for everyone, using the same approach they've used to keep racial disparities low in these communities. The counties in the orange quadrant are unique in that when it comes to overall performance, these counties have outcomes relatively higher than the counties in the rest of the state. Unfortunately, overall prosperity and positive outcomes that many of these counties experience are not enjoyed by everyone. Within these counties, there are some groups that have poorer than average outcomes, leading to wider gaps between racial groups. The encouraging thing about these counties is that there are resources available for folks here. We just have to make sure that everyone has access and opportunity to these resources. The last quadrant in the green represents the counties that not only have high overall performance, but low levels of disparity. While it might be fair to assume that these counties are the ones the rest of the state should strive to emulate, these counties also have their challenges. In addition to this, it turns out that one of the reasons why we might not see high levels of racial disparities in these counties is because these counties aren't that racially diverse to begin with. In the end, this quadrant reminds us that there is no utopia and that policymakers and advocates must remain vigilant about equity, making sure that as these counties continue to prosper economically, they also make sure that they continue to do what they've done to maintain racial equity. Our hope is that over time, wins at the local and state levels can lead to improvements in overall performance and equity. The most ideal scenario would be to see all of these counties move into the far upper left-hand corner of the graph, where all Californians can have a chance at opportunity. I've added this slide here to let you know that at the beginning of 2019, we added cities to race counts. Now, users can use our 3D framework to look at performance, disparity, and impact at the city level. It features 136 cities, all of which have a population of 65,000 or more. So let's give folks an opportunity to see if their city is on the list. We hope that folks who do work at the more local level find this data useful. Okay, I know that was a lot of information. So at this point, I want to take a moment to answer some of your questions in case some participants weren't able to follow, or if you found any of the concepts unclear or difficult to grasp.
Question one. Did you say the counties and the green bubbles had less racial disparity to begin with?
No, thank you for asking that question. So give me a moment to clarify. It's not that the counties had less racial disparity to begin with, it's that the counties have less racial diversity to begin with. Thanks for asking that question.
So there are no relatively high performing districts that have low levels of racial disparity?
So there are. Those are the counties that are in the green. These are the counties that are high performing. They have low levels of racial disparity, but it doesn't mean they have no racial disparity. It just means that their levels of racial disparity is less than the rest of the state. Thanks for your question.
Are there any plans to continue expanding city lists to include smaller cities?
Thanks for asking that question. So one of the difficulties around creating a rigorous data tool like this is that the smaller the data sample gets, the harder it is to get accurate data. So I'm not sure if we will ever get to the point where we can add smaller cities to the list, but I do think that in the future, we may strongly consider looking into smaller jurisdictions. So for instance, maybe city council districts that are smaller than cities. So for instance, I think Los Angeles County has 8 city council districts, possibly cutting the data down to the council district level.
And will this presentation be shared?
Yes, we are recording this presentation, and so we hope to be sending the YouTube link to folks who are interested later on. Okay, let's move it along. Thank you for your questions. Let me get back to the PowerPoint. There we go. So before we get into the key takeaways of our analysis of racial disparity in California, I would like to briefly go over some of the regional patterns we observed. Let's take the Bay Area, for example. Notice that nearly all of the counties in this region are above the horizontal axis, meaning that their outcomes are above average in terms of performance. However, as you can see from the counties to the right, the orange counties, the Bay Area has some of the biggest racial disparities relative to the rest of the state. Most of these disparities are around issue areas like education, housing, and health access. So here's a question I like to pose to participants. Why do you suppose these counties are so high performing? What is it about the landscape or the economy that lends itself to above average outcomes? Also, think about the demographics. What about the social and political landscape? How do each of these factors contribute to what we see here? And what might that look like for people on the ground? So basically, what does that look like for people's day-to-day lived experience? Now let's look at the Central Valley region. Here we see the opposite effect. Whereas Bay Area counties are predominantly positioned above the axis, we see that the counties in the Central Valley are well below the axis. Again, what are the factors contributing to these outcomes? The economy, the physical landscape, racial demographics, the social and political landscape. What might that look or feel like for people on the ground? Let's take Fresno County, for example. Fresno is the largest county in this region in terms of population. It ranks the 6th most racially disparate overall in the entire state. The county is in the red on every single issue area except the built environment. So not only is everyone in the county struggling when it comes to health, education, housing, and economic opportunity, there are folks in this county who have even worse outcomes than the county averages on these issues. The biggest disparity issues in the region are on democracy, education, and once again, economic opportunity. Moving on to the SoCal region, we can see that compared to the other two, there's less of a clear pattern in terms of performance. Notice that about half of the counties in the region are above the axis, with the other half below the axis. Now, as you might imagine, we have San Diego and Orange counties above the axis with slightly better than average performance, and Riverside and San Bernardino below the axis with below average performance. When we look at LA County, however, folks might expect it to perform more like a San Diego and an Orange County and less like a Riverside or a San Bernardino County. Later in this webinar, we'll dig deep into the reasons why overall, looking at all of the 7 issue areas combined, LA performs at a 44 out of 58. One hint I can give you right now is to look at the size of the county in terms of population. How might LA's population of 10 million people factor into its overall performance? Overall, one thing we're going to want to pay close attention to is how environmental factors over the next several years may lead to migration, and how migration patterns, depending on how many people are impacted, might change the outcomes we're seeing in different regions. The key takeaways we arrived at by applying a racial equity lens to the state of California were that in every corner of the state, in every aspect of life, people of color and indigenous peoples still face the challenge of race-based disparities. Second, we noticed that injustice plays itself out differently in each region, and different racial communities experience higher barriers in some issue areas relative to others. By race, we see that the Black community has the highest number of indicators where they have the worst rates and outcomes. These burdens cut across multiple issue areas from life expectancy, home ownership, school suspensions, household income, and incarceration. Latinos are the next most likely group to face the worst disparities across indicators, but they represent the largest number of Californians laboring under racial disparities. Last, while Asians tend to score well on many indicators, there's quite a bit of heterogeneity within this group. In other words, the performance of certain Asian subgroups might inflate the overall performance of the entire group. In the near future, we'd like to see how we can disaggregate this data and break out the outcomes for Asian subgroups by ethnic group. At the top of this webinar, I asked the guiding question: how do we create systems that ensure equitable opportunities for all Californians? But here's the question I think precedes that one. How did we wind up with systems that produce these kinds of inequities we see in the first place? In our launch report, we have a section where we go into the major factors driving racial inequity in the state. They include the following: antiquated public systems that reinforce racial biases or do little to keep it in check, exclusionary economic development, imbalance of political power, and overutilization of need-blind or colorblind policies. If you would like to learn more about the drivers, you can download our launch report at racecounts.org/issues/launch-report/. So before we get into the demonstration of the site, let's take a moment to dig into a specific county, Los Angeles. Here's a quick look at the demographic breakdown of the county. Of the approximately 10 million people in LA County, about 30% are white, almost half Latino, less than 10% Black, 14% Asian, and less than 1% Native American and Pacific Islander. Here's a screen grab of the site with all 58 counties on the scatter plot, and LA County highlighted by the big yellow bubble with the Black outline. Let me grab the mouse here. If you look at the info in the box, it tells us that we're looking at Los Angeles County, which has an overall disparity ranking of 28 out of 58 counties, and an overall performance ranking of 44 out of 58 counties. So let's break that down once again. Since the bubble representing LA County is below the axis, LA has a below average performance on all issue areas combined. When we look at racial disparity, which is measured by how far the bubble is to the left or the right, you can see that LA is right in the middle. So it's neither above nor below average in terms of racial disparity when compared to the rest of the counties in the state. It's just about average. So why does LA perform so poorly relative to the rest of the state? Right now, we're looking at what we call the heat table of disparity. What this feature allows us to do is to take a snapshot or be able to quickly eyeball all 7 key issue areas at once, so we can pinpoint which issues a county struggles with the most. Here, we can see that on most issue areas, LA is in yellow, but on 3 issues, crime and justice, healthy built environment, and housing, LA is in the red. Let's take a look at criminal justice and housing. Once again, overall, on all issue areas combined, LA has a disparity ranking of 28. And so this is, if you can see here to the left of the screen, we have this red highlight that shows us that we're looking at a composite of all issues. And then here, when we filter by indicator, we can see that we're looking at all indicators combined. Now, when we zoom in, we can see that on criminal justice, LA goes from 28th most racially disparate to 12th most racially disparate in the state. Again, if you look to the left of the screen, you can see that now we've started to filter by criminal justice. So we're looking at all of the indicators within the criminal justice issue area. If we zoom in even more, we can see that LA goes from 28th overall to 12th most disparate in criminal justice to second most disparate in incarceration. And again, now we've started to filter. Look at the left of the screen. We've begun to filter by indicator. So we're looking at incarceration here. So why is that? Why does LA rank so high in terms of racial disparity in incarceration? If we look at our chart here that breaks down incarceration rate, we can see that for every 1,000 Black residents in the county, nearly 21 Black people are incarcerated, compared to less than 2 out of every 1,000 white residents, and 0.2 out of every Asian resident. If we do the math, we can see that Black residents in Los Angeles County are 15 times more likely to be incarcerated than white residents, and 100 times more likely to be incarcerated than Asian residents. So let's turn our attention to another pressing issue in LA County, housing. If we zoom in on housing and look specifically at housing quality, we can see that LA County is again second most racially disparate in the state. Now, what do we mean by housing quality? According to this bar graph, we can see that when we compare between racial groups, Latino residents are 2.5 times more likely than white residents to live in a structure that lacks a kitchen, plumbing, or heat. This is what we mean by housing quality. So again, ask yourself a few questions. What is it about the rental and housing markets in LA County and the economic conditions for people of color that might produce the disparities we're seeing? How about income after housing costs? When we look at the differences between homeowners, we can see that on an annual basis, after paying for their mortgages, white homeowners have around $29,000 more left than their African American counterparts, and a little over $22,000 more left than their Latino counterparts. The racial disparity is similar between renters. White renters end up with about $25,000 more than Black renters and $15,000 more than Latino renters. These numbers illustrate that after people of color pay for housing costs, they have very little left for things like childcare, healthcare, food, and transportation costs, which is probably why we see people of color living in substandard housing. Again, these are structures that lack a kitchen, plumbing, and heat, because it's likely that they can afford. Last but not least, on home ownership, LA ranks the second worst to San Francisco County, which I'm sure surprises no one. Okay, let's move on to the live demo section of the webinar. So let's see if we can pull up the website. And I want to encourage users to go to www.racecounts.org in your web browsers. The home page should be a dark blue screen featuring the page. Are we still sharing? Let me share this because I don't think we're sharing this. Sorry guys, bear with me for a moment. There we are. The home page should be a dark blue screen featuring the phrase, California is at a turning point. Scroll past the screen, and you'll see our 3D analytical framework, performance disparity, and impact explained. If we scroll back to the top of the page, and at the upper right-hand corner, in the top navigation bar, you see the options state, counties, cities, issues, and map. Choose state. This option will bring you to the main page, which features our county and city scatter plots. So here are our county scatter plots here. And here are our city scatter plots. So these graphs provide a statewide view of California, either through all 58 counties or our largest 136 cities. If we focus on the county scatter plot, you'll see all 58 California counties depicted in green, orange, yellow, or red bubbles. You can hover over any given bubble to find out which county is where. So I'm not sure if you're able to follow on the screen, but if you hover over any of these bubbles, you can see which county is positioned where. You can also use the drop-down menu to the left to highlight the county you're looking for. This view provides a composite of the performance and disparity of all 17 issue areas and 44 indicators defined. As you can see, the options, all issues, and all indicators highlighted in the menu. If you want to zoom in and see how a county is doing on a specific issue or indicator, you would choose the county you're interested in from the drop down to the left. So we already looked at Los Angeles County. Let's zoom in on the neighboring Ventura County for this demo. Go to the bottom, and here we have it, Ventura County. You'll see Ventura highlighted on the graph with this box and also the black highlight around the bubble. In the box, you'll find its disparity and performance rankings. The disparity ranking is 10 and the performance ranking is 18. It's in the orange quadrant, which means that relative to the other counties, overall, Ventura County is high performing, but also high disparity. So let's do a few examples with Ventura. So we know that Ventura ranks 18 on racial disparity overall, but let's take a look at economic opportunity. We can see that Ventura moves from the orange quadrant to the green quadrant. Ventura goes from 18th overall in terms of racial disparity, which is a high disparity level, to 46th racially disparate in terms of economic opportunity, which is low disparity. In other words, a more acceptable level. Now, say you want to hone in on a specific indicator within economic opportunity, like employment. Once again, we have Ventura County in the green, showing that relative to the rest of the state, this county has a smaller racial gap in employment than most of the other counties in the state. If we take household income, however, we get a different story. Notice that Ventura County moves to the right, meaning higher, in this case, slightly higher than average racial disparity on this indicator. So let's learn more. If we go into the box, make sure we get this for Ventura County. If we go into the box and click Learn More, so let me take this back. So we go to Ventura County from the navigation bar. It'll take us to the county profile for Ventura County. So here we can see how Ventura ranks overall. It shows us that Ventura is the 10th most racially disparate county in California. If you scroll down, we can also get a look at the total population in the county, as well as the racial demographic breakdown in the county. If you hover over any of the bar charts, you'll see the actual percentage of each racial group in the county. So for instance, we have about 50% white in Ventura County, a little bit over 40% Latino, 6.8% Asian, and et cetera. We scroll down to median household income, which is what we were interested in a second ago. We can see that on the right-hand side, on average, the median household income for the county is a little bit over $77,000 a year. If we look at the racial breakdown, we can see that for Asian households, that household median income goes up to $104,000 a year compared to Latino households, which bring home an average of $58,000 a year. If we look at another indicator within this issue area like poverty, we'll notice that overall in the county, the average poverty level is 11.1%. However, while the poverty level might be 6% for Asian households, that poverty level is 18% for Latino households. Let's look at another issue. Let's go back to Ventura County and explore another issue in this county. Go to the left-hand bar and choose Ventura again. And we see Ventura here highlighted, disparity ranking of 10. We choose a different key issue area like criminal justice. We see Ventura shoot all the way to the right with a disparity ranking of 1. Now, what makes Ventura County have so much racial disparity in terms of criminal justice? If we scroll down to the filters, we can see that when we look at truancy arrests, Ventura County ranks 3rd in racial disparity on truancy arrests and 2nd in racial disparity on curfew arrests. That's usually an indicator that when it comes to criminal justice and arrests of youth in Ventura County, this is an issue that advocates in this area would really want to focus their efforts on. So let me give you guys a moment to play with this a little, and then I'll check back in to show you some of the other features we have here. All right, so here are a few of the other features that we have here, which I think are pretty neat. If you go into the little 3 lines in the upper right-hand corner of any of the graphs you see, that will allow you to download any of these graphs, which become exportable tools. So let's give you an example. So you see there? You click on that and you can choose to make this a JPEG if you like. Let me see if I can give another example of that. Go back here to one of, let's do Ventura County since we started with Ventura County. So the same thing goes for the bar graphs. You scroll down and you're interested in, let's say, taking a bar graph with you. You click on the 3 lines in the upper right-hand corner here. choose download JPEG, and it gives you the opportunity to download. Here is another one of the neat features that we have on the site. Let's say we want to look at cities. So here's the city profile for the city of Alameda. If you look here, this little plus sign, this allows you to add another city that you might want to compare side by side. So we know Alameda County also has Oakland. So let's see how Alameda compares to the city of Oakland. So here you see the bar graphs for both. You have the overall population for Alameda. Right beneath it, you can see the overall population for Oakland. And then you can see the different demographic breakdowns for both of those cities. Same with the outcomes. You can see the bar charts side by side for each of those cities. You can see Alameda in the yellow bars and Oakland depicted in the orange bars. Let's move back to our PowerPoint. Are we back on the screen with the PowerPoint? Nice. So now that we've done the live demo, I'm sure you guys are wondering what's the point of all of this. Let's go back to our guiding question from the top. How do we create systems that ensure equitable access to resources and opportunity for all Californians? This is what makes this tool so impactful. By allowing users to pinpoint the places in the issues where the biggest resource and opportunity gaps exist, various stakeholders can interrogate the systems and institutions producing these inequities and push for policy changes at the state, county, and local levels in a way that's informed by the data. So this is where the advocacy comes in. Here we have some examples of recent advocacy campaigns led by local coalitions of community or organizing groups. The first one is the School Climate Bill of Rights. Here, Los Angeles Unified School District students and their allies won the right for students to go to school in a safe and healthy environment. This not only resulted in the implementation of restorative justice programs in schools in place of suspensions and expulsions, it also led to the elimination of suspensions due to willful defiance, an issue that disproportionately impacted Black and Brown students. Using school data on suspensions, youth advocates were able to persuade the Los Angeles Unified School District Board to adopt this change. Other advocacy campaigns include the SENI, or Students' Equity Needs Index, and Proposition 47, which reclassified certain felonies as misdemeanors, allowing for the resentencing and release of several thousand justice-impacted folks. Both of these campaigns involve the use of data on racial disparities between groups and advocacy for more equitable outcomes. The last example is Schools and Communities First, a significant campaign effort that can have substantial impact on communities that have suffered from years of disinvestment in schools and local services like parks, libraries, hospitals, and the like. By looking at the data on racial disparities in education, healthcare access to parks, and so forth, we can get community residents to close the loophole on taxing commercial properties across the state. In essence, race counts can help community organizations build alliances across a host of issues. So what's next for race counts? First and foremost, I'm available to host in-person trainings for organizations that want to provide their staff an in-depth tutorial on how to use race counts. Next month, we'll be publishing our Indigenous Peoples Report in conjunction with the California Native Vote Project. This is something that I'm truly looking forward to. And in 2020, we'll be rebooting race counts with a brand new design, updated data, and more features. We'll also be adding new indicators like evictions, mental health access, chronic absenteeism, and disconnected youth. More ways for you to use this tool to serve your organization's purpose. So that's the end of our webinar. Thank you for taking time to join us today. Please be sure to visit the link that we'll be sending to your email to complete the SurveyMonkey for this webinar. We appreciate the feedback. It looks like we have some questions before we log off. Okay, scroll down.
Okay. So, we do have a couple questions. How was this data collected?
Thank you for the question. So like we said earlier in the presentation, all of this data came from publicly available data sources. So we tapped into those data sources, and I can give you an example of some of the data sources we grabbed this data from. Give me 1 second. So some of our sources include the U.S. Census Bureau, the American Community Survey 5-year estimates, California Department of Corrections, California Department of Justice, California Department of Education, California Department of Public Health, Department of Finance, U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, and the U.S. Department of Agriculture, just to name a few. Thanks for your question. We have another question.
How are the indicators combined to create a composite score by key issue? That's one question.
Okay, and then likewise, how is a composite score across issues created? So I don't want to misquote our methodology. And so I think the best thing for me to do is to refer you to the methodology section of our website, which you can find at www.racecounts.org. Do we have any more? So I think another question we have here is, how does race counts differ from other data tools like Healthy Places Index that cover healthy built environment indicators like drinking, water contaminants, toxic releases, and recreational parks? That's a great question. I have heard about the Healthy Places Index. Unfortunately, I'm not familiar enough with that tool to be able to tell you the difference between our tool and theirs. Sorry about that. But if you can send us an email, we can probably answer your question for you. So thanks for your question.
Next question. Can we export the data for a particular county or city as an Excel sheet or only a graph?
So right now we can only export the data as graphs, but we are looking forward to giving users the opportunity to export data as an Excel sheet with our reboot. I'm not completely sure about that, but I think that's one of our plans for the reboot of the site. Thanks for your question.
And once again, will the recorded webinar be available for folks who could not attend today?
Yes. So I think that's it. Thank you everybody for joining us today. Have a great rest of your day.